Jeff, thank you very much for that wonderful introduction. It sounds vaguely familiar. I do want to say that, you know, normally at great conferences that I've attended in the past, the resident acolyte is invited along to speak at the outset, which is absolutely wonderful because, you know, you can fill the room with platitudes and everybody will have forgotten by the time all the experts have spoken. And today, it's totally the reverse. I mean, you've heard all the experts, and now you're going to get all the platitudes. But I do want to say what a great delight it is to be here. First and foremost, to thank the CEO of AUSVEG, the wonderful Richard Mulcahy, who's been a great and valued friend over many years, as well, of course, as the equally persuasive Daniel Lisong of Corporate Communications, for persuading me that I could tell funny stories or not so funny stories or whatever, and come along and entertain you before you get back to the real world of the question and answer session, which is to follow. Yeah, look, by way of background, let me say that I spent the last 4 years of my almost 40 years in the Irish Foreign Service as ambassador to 5 of the countries of Southeast Asia. I was based in Singapore, which is a wonderful country to be based in, and was also accredited as ambassador to Brunei Darussalam, East Timor, Indonesia, and the Philippines. 5 countries, I suggest to you, that in a very remarkable way reflect all the rich diversity and complexity of the vast Asian continent, itself home to 2/3 of the world's inhabitants and 1/3, today 1/3 of the world's wealth, which will, the Asian Development Bank tells us in their most recent report, have grown to an estimated 52% of the world's GDP by 2050. This is impressive. Perhaps it's not entirely surprising when you consider that Asia is home to the world's most populous nation on the planet, the People's Republic of China, home to the world's largest democracy, the Republic of India, home to the world's largest constitutional monarchy, Japan, and home to the country with the world's largest Muslim population, the Republic of Indonesia. And as we focus on ASEAN, on Brunei, Cambodia, Indonesia, Laos, Malaysia, Myanmar, Singapore, Thailand, Vietnam, and the Philippines, we are looking at a region with a combined population of 625 million, or 9% of the world's population. And those thoughts and statistics bring me to the first point that I would like to emphasize on any to-do list, and that is the vital importance of looking beyond the much-used catchphrase and soundbite of doing business in Asia. It's a core message that I sought to stress at the outset of briefings I gave to Irish exporters, investors, as they sought to understand the dynamics and sensitivities, as well as the opportunities and benefits of bringing their business to Southeast Asia. Frankly, to talk about doing business in Asia or in Southeast Asia is as bland and uninformative as talking about doing business in Europe. Yes, there are certain commonalities across Europe, but there are also crucial differences, whether you set out to do business in France, in Spain, or in Germany, all of whom are within the Eurozone, or whether you set out to do business in Poland, Bulgaria, or Sweden, none of whom are in the Eurozone, but all of whom are in the European Union. And then, of course, to make things entirely simple, you may decide to do business in Norway, in Switzerland, or in Russia, none of whom are in either the European Union or the Eurozone, but all of whom, of course, are among the great trading nations of Europe. Similarly, Asia is not a monolith. Indeed, as Dr. Rodney said earlier in his, and others as well in his presentation, it is a rich and vibrant diversity of countries with their own stories, their own identities and personalities. Indeed, within many of Asia's individual nations, we also find rich diversities of traditions, cultures, religions, and regional identities. And that rich diversity is often hidden behind the symbol of one national flag. In the case of China, a country which is home to more than 1.35 billion people, there are immensely important regional and provincial variations, each with enormously impressive economies of scale, a scale that is overwhelming when compared to a small country like that of Ireland with 4.5 million people, but also huge when compared to a continental nation like Australia with over 23 million people. Indeed, the combined population of the two largest provinces of China is over 200 million people, and yet that number constitutes only 15% of China's entire population. The combined population of these two provinces is more than twice the population of the Philippines, more than 9 times the population of Australia, 34 times the population of Victoria, and almost 40 times larger than the population of Queensland, where we meet today. Even when we focus more closely on Southeast Asia, we see a large mainland peninsula with significant countries and markets like Cambodia, Vietnam and Laos, and a massive maritime zone with some 20,000 islands, at the heart of which we find the commercial driving forces of the celebrated tiger economies of Singapore, Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand and the Philippines. Hence, when we talk about doing business in Asia, and indeed in Southeast Asia, it is vital at the very outset to recognize that we are talking of a region with huge populations, with important cultural as well as legal and governmental diversities, and with impressive economies of scale. And it is that broad landscape which also focuses us on the need to be selective. For we can't do business in Asia, but we can do business in a carefully selected and well-targeted country, region, or province within Asia. And hence, at the top of our to-do list, I suggest that we must identify where best to focus our own business efforts, where to find our greatest trading advantages, and where real commercial benefits will result in sustainable and profitable business returns. In embarking on that search, I was very much taken by Sarah Huntley on the whole issue of beetroot earlier today. But one of the examples that I gave to Irish business people was not actually drawn from an experience in Asia and Southeast Asia, but rather from Australia and from Starbucks in Australia. When I was here as ambassador from 1995 to 2002, Starbucks ran into huge problems because Starbucks Corporation decided on a particular structure when it decided to take its great venture across outside and beyond the United States. And when it came to Australia, it didn't really work in Australia. They ran into huge problems, and part of the reason was that they hadn't, I think, allowed for some of that great rich Greek and Italian heritage that you find in Australia, which gave Australians a great sensitivity for good coffee. I'm not saying that they serve very bad coffee, but there was a sophisticated palate, which now, I mean, having thought of that story and decided, yes, I'd still proceed, as I walked out of the Sofitel for the last couple of days, the wonderful coffee shop immediately opposite is none other than Starbucks. But by and large, they had serious problems, which, well, it's good to see some of them at least have been overcome. That story brings me back to the second major to-do task, I think, on your priority list, which is to ask where you, with your specific product and produce, can find the best market with the most profitable returns. And seeking for the answer to that question brings me immediately to the vital role of well-focused and reliable market research. Here in Australia, that research is enabled by an entire range of important support mechanisms that in the world of do's and don'ts must indeed figure prominently on a serious to-do list. In Australia, both exporters and overseas investors are fortunate that over the years, successive federal governments have put in place a range of impressive free trade agreements across the entire Asia-Pacific region and indeed beyond. In fact, the first ever free trade agreement concluded by ASEAN, the countries of Southeast Asia, was with Australia and New Zealand. It happened it was finalized in August 2008 in Singapore. Believe it or not, I was there as part of the delegation then of the European Union. And indeed, while the European Union was ASEAN's first dialogue partner, it had not at that time been able to secure a free trade agreement. And indeed, I have to confess that I was somewhat bemused by a number of my EU colleagues who were perplexed at how the great trading nations of Europe had been outmaneuvered by these two wonderful countries, rightly celebrated for their renowned skills on the sports field, in cricket, in Aussie rules, in rugby union, to name but a few, were now also winning on the fields of free trade and market access. So once you have decided to bring your produce and your products beyond Australia's shores, my advice is that you talk indeed to HAL, to AUSVEG, to make contact with Austrade. We had a wonderful presentation earlier this morning on Austrade to help you identify the leading ASEAN markets best suited to your product and your produce. They will brief you on the rules, talk you through the incentives, help you to become part of the exporting community through one-on meetings, business seminars, conferences, and indeed to overseas trade missions. Let me say on that over the years I've always been impressed by the success and impact of Australian trade missions. As ambassador in Warsaw in the early 90s, I saw my Australian colleague Tony Kevin host receptions and arrange meetings for large groups of Australian business women and men who wanted to enter the ground floor of the then emerging markets of Central and Eastern Europe after the fall of the Berlin Wall. I will remember some of the most successful trade missions to Egypt, Jordan, and Lebanon were those organized by the local trade commissioners in cooperation with outstanding ambassadors like Robert Newton and Bob Bowker. And let me say that in Egypt, I had to contend with one of the huge problems that the Irish had in exporting to the region. For up to, I think, the year 2000, Egypt had been the largest destination for Irish beef in the world. Almost a third of all the beef that the Irish managed to grow was exported to Egypt. It was in excess of 200,000 tons a year, which was a huge... That collapsed in 2000 with the onset of BSE. And yes, we set about, I had to set about, part of my challenge when I went in 2002, was to try to assure the Egyptians that yes, BSE had been addressed, was over, we were moving on, there was a new stage and all the rest of it. But, and yes, eventually they accepted that. But the next step was in fact to confront what Anthony had talked about earlier, and that was the success of a remarkable Australian brand. Australia had branded wonderfully and very successfully, securely, the safety and the quality of its beef. And quite frankly, that was, I would say, virtually immovable. It was embedded in the consciousness of the Egyptian market. I also saw in Singapore how the Australian trade delegations came along, always led at a very high political level to introduce traders, new exporters, investors to the importing and investing community, the business community in Singapore and in other countries, but certainly in Singapore, it struck me that with great focus that was done. And I know the dedicated skill and time-consuming work that negotiations on free trade agreements and organizing trade missions requires. And I was a bit surprised, I have to say, when I was recently scanning through a number of these websites. You know, when you live down in wonderful Port Macquarie and you've nothing else to do, you can, troll across the wonderful internet. And I discovered on one of the state government websites that Australia's FTAs still remain up to 70% underutilised by the Australian business community. Now that I thought was an interesting statistic. It's a challenge. It's a challenge also to everybody who's interested in exporting to become aware of the free trade agreements. A lot of effort goes into opening up markets, creating opportunities, and really they're there to be seized. Ultimately, I simply want to underline, and indeed, as did Louisa Rust in her superb presentation earlier this morning, and Renee White earlier, that on your to-do list, you include the well-considered and well-proven systems and strategies that will enable you to identify the best destination for your products in the most rewarding of overseas markets. However, in Australia, let me add, support is not only governmental and official. For here in Australia, you have an enormous advantage that many other countries don't have of living in one of the world's, perhaps some people would say, the world's most successful multicultural society. Now, despite whatever skepticism some people might have about the famous M word, this society gives all within the exporting community immediate access to a range of impressive business associations, as well as to numerous talented individuals from across all the major countries in our immediate neighbourhood. In the Southeast Asian context, I think immediately of the Australia-Singapore Chamber of Commerce and Industry, the Australia Business Association of Cambodia, the Australian Business Councils of Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, Vietnam, and the Philippines. And the list goes on. In my experience, quite frankly, they are all keenly interested in facilitating business connections from their home countries in accessing the Australian market, but also assisting Australian exporters and investors who are interested in doing business with their home countries, in strengthening the very valuable relationship between Australia and each of their native lands. They can help with some of the essential introductions, advise you on possible customers and partnerships that in a number of cases really are vital to success, and of guiding you on customs and protocols across the great variety of traditions in this vast region. There are also many individuals, individual nationals from all of these countries. Many of them are Australian citizens and certainly Australian residents who have an intimate knowledge of many of the leading personalities, as well as of the mindset, the cultural backgrounds, starting a new business in countries of their birth and heritage. They have information which is of enormous importance, and they may be even available not only to advise as consultants, but maybe to become part of the exporting team. I see you're looking at the watch and I'm running out of time, and I'll come very quickly to the end. There was one particular event, and I mean, I say all of that, when I came to Singapore in 2006, one of the great beer companies, well, I suppose what one would say alcohol companies in the world, Diageo, came along, their representative came along to talk to me about an additional tax that had been placed on the great and wonderful Irish product of Guinness. And you know how dear Guinness is to all of us, certainly those who are Irish and maybe others. And that arose from the fact that one of the great Lords Ivy, who had owned the Guinness company, had come to Singapore many years earlier and had talked up the prospects of establishing a brewery in downtown Singapore. And then subsequently went off and he took his brewery up to Malaysia and left behind a feeling of, great irritation and disappointment and all the rest of it. And I was asked if I would set about the task of getting rid of this additional tax that had been imposed. I was entirely successful. Thankfully, it was wonderful, for which I got a box of Belgian chocolates, which was really rewarding. And I tell the story not just to boast about a great diplomatic achievement, but in fact to underline the importance of being culturally sensitive, understand business practice, know the market before you engage in contacts and conversations that might indeed embarrass your interlocutor at a later stage or even cause a loss of face. Patience, persuasion, perseverance, and integrity are all great virtues to be embraced in the search for success. A different, but I think also a very invaluable lesson I learned from conversations during those early days in Singapore was from a number of local Singapore business executives who told me that one of the biggest surprises, some would say challenges, that Asians experience, that they experience and generally experience across Asia in their first encounter with European business executives is how quickly Westerners want to move from the initial greetings of hello, good day, whatever, directly to the business agenda. In contrast, Asians generally prefer to get to know the person they're interfacing with before they move into the detailed discussion of business transactions. This is partly cultural, but it's also partly commercial, for they want to be reassured that they are dealing with a reliable partner, that they also want to see their business agreement, and they also see their business agreements as part of a longer-term relationship rather than just simply as a once-off deal. Yes, it's often said that Orientals and Westerners inherit and inhabit different philosophical traditions, different ways of thinking. Westerners tend to be highly individualistic, conscious of our own priorities and personal interests, while Asians, and especially I think those of Chinese heritage, are much more conscious of the values of harmony, of interpersonal cooperation, of engaging in community enterprise, in which all people can benefit. Indeed, in my time in Singapore, repeatedly brought home to me the important lesson that the successful merging of these two ways of thinking, of blending individual leadership with collective harmony, of which I saw, for example, examples in the impressive Singapore banking sector, can ultimately lead to powerful institutions and to highly profitable joint ventures. An important additional aspect of this particular point is to urge you to do your best also to avoid the revolving door policy of many Western, larger, but particularly larger Western corporations. Try to keep your team intact. Asians have a strong preference for business partners who convey stability, reliability, and longer-term commitment. And this leads me to the important to-do issue of building interpersonal relations. Socializing is a central aspect of doing business, at least in my experience, in Southeast Asia. Doesn't mean, long, great drinking parties, karaoke nights, or lengthy formal speeches like this one, but it does mean building relationships through hospitality, whether it be breakfasts in Singapore, lunches in Kuala Lumpur, or dinners in Bangkok. The effort is important and always rewarding. However you do it, and when you do it, remain focused on the fact that what you are engaged on is building trust and confidence, a trust and confidence that will lead to commitment and to that important sense of obligation on the part of your Asian partner to ensure that your joint venture together will be a success. Asians do not forget genuine engagement and generous hospitality, and they will remain committed to repaying both by doing all they can to guarantee success. Finally, and I know I've really seriously run over time, but just two more brief points. Don't hesitate to socialize with the members of your own local expat communities and join in the activities of the many Australian business associations right across the region. There is ever a strong sense of solidarity among those living and working abroad that can be of exceptional assistance in guiding the newcomer, and especially in the early days of business development. This thing, oh, I can do my own thing. Well, quite frankly, sometimes you can't. The lone sheep invariably gets lost. Sometimes can be devoured, but that I'm sure wouldn't happen. But don't be reluctant. Secondly, don't be reluctant to consider partnerships or alliances with individuals and groups that you might think back home in Australia as competitors and rivals. I make this point against the background of three particular examples. First, in the education sector, where I saw universities who compete for talent and numbers at home work together to attract overseas students and build overseas campuses. Secondly, in the airline business, where we again see intense competition in the domestic market, regularly again, this gives ways in overseas markets to joint ventures, to joint shared business ventures, and to joint tourism promotion. And finally, in the agriculture business, I saw at first hand cooperation between small farmers cooperatives in the southwest of Ireland grow into the hugely significant Kerry Group, which is now established in 24 countries worldwide, has a very important plant here outside Brisbane, and it has grown phenomenally from a very small group of people to an industry with now an annualized sales of approximately 8 billion Australian dollars. These, dear friends, are some thoughts which I hope will be of interest to your discussions and reflections and to all the wonderful questions you'll ask the very wise panel after I've stepped down. I want to thank you, all those again who are responsible for inviting me to come along and to meet some wonderful people last night and today, to congratulate all those magnificent people who were awarded last night. I'm sure, as in so many of these great events, everybody deserved an award. Sometimes they just go to one or two, but it was a wonderful event which again stressed the the vitality of this great horticulture sector. So I wish you every success in all your ambitions and in your exporting enterprises across Southeast Asia and well beyond. Thank you.